All right, so this is the meal formatting formula that I use when I'm drafting almost any paper, sometimes even emails. It really just helps me get the idea down. Um, and it's a formula that I think a lot of more logical minds appreciate because it gives them something to kind of follow and guide them as they're writing. And the thing to notice about the meal formula is that it is repetitive. You want your paragraphs to stay focused, and it seems like you are saying the same thing in a new way a few different times. And that is actually the goal because our readers likely aren't familiar with what we're saying. And even if they are, they may not be as familiar with the language that the scientists are using or the language that you're using. And so the more examples that we can give them, the more likely they are to understand the content and the more likely it is to flow rather than jumping from one idea to the next. So it's called the meal because there are 4 points that align with that acronym. And it is our first drafting tool that I will give you for these articles. And though we're going to start it for this smaller article or this first article, you can use it for all of the drafting that we'll be doing. So M is the first letter, and this is just the first sentence in your paragraph. And so if you think of each meal as one paragraph and each letter as one sentence minimum, you would have a 4 sentence paragraph, which is pretty standard for Scientific American. You can have a few sentences for each one or different numbers, sentences for each prompt. But just to kind of get you going at the bare minimum, one sentence per prompt. So M is the main idea, and that's just the purpose, and it's stating the purpose to your readers. So don't say, this paragraph will talk about trees. Instead, you'll come up with something that's a little more important or connected, that this specific tree is being researched right now or is useful for this type of medicine. So just kind of what you'll be examining in that paragraph. The next point is E for evidence. And this evidence is what you'll pull from your sources in most cases. Sometimes it is just an example that you're going to use or a narrative, but in most cases, you'll be including a quote or a statistic from the research. So that's something that you'll kind of look for outside of yourself. And then A is analysis. And if you're like me, it took me a really long time to wrap my head around what is analysis. And in this case, it's just an interpretation of the evidence. So if there are 95% of people in the world who are affected by this illness, then your analysis or evidence of that is that this is a big issue. This affects a lot of readers, that this is why it's important for people to be educated on or aware of. So it's just a simple kind of restating of the evidence in your own way. So why you think that's important or what you interpret that number to mean for readers. Because if we don't tell our readers what we think of that, they're going to make their own conclusion. They're going to jump to their own conclusion. And likely it's not going to be the same as ours. So making sure that we are telling them that seems, again, repetitive or redundant, but it actually helps them make the connections that we want them to make. And then the last point, L, is just a link or a transition. And this really helps kind of set the stage for your readers of what's coming next. So it kind of concludes this paragraph and then moves on to the next or leads into it. And this is, again, something that seems obvious and almost unnecessary, but for the flow of reading and the ease of reading and the connections that will help readers understand your topics, this is a really important part. And sometimes it's really hard for us to link into the next paragraph, especially if we are switching sections, going into a new topic. And so if you can't link to the next paragraph, then link back to the full purpose of the paper, because that's always a good place to go, where even if you can't connect it to what's coming next, you can connect it to, oh yeah, and this paper is about trees. So even if your next section is maybe about the history of trees, it still connects. So that's another way that you can do a transition or a link. So if you scroll down here, and this is what is in the attached document that goes with this video, so you'll have a copy of this. But you can see an example paragraph. And again, it looks small, but this is fairly standard for Scientific American paragraph sizes. And so here I chose to do one that talks about the participants of a study, because that is a good purpose for a paragraph that most of you will have, where you want to talk at least in one paragraph about the participants. And so you'll see that I've labeled each sentence, and there are only 4. So the first one for the main idea is that the participants in this particular study are important to consider. So that's the purpose of this paragraph, is we think it's important to consider and for our readers to consider. So just letting them know that and stating it obviously. Then the evidence is that the researchers observed 24 female participants between the ages of 18 and 24, all of which had type 2 diabetes. So as much information there as you can give. The next is the analysis, or your interpretation of that. So kind of saying, well, this is a small sample size and the study lacked a control group. So it didn't really say that in the sentence, but that's actually what it implied, that there was a small group and there were no other participants. So, or that people that didn't have diabetes, right? So that's another way to tell them. Even sometimes it's a way to tell them something that isn't obvious or necessary, or that the researchers thought was necessary, but that you think is necessary. And then to link it to the next paragraph, which I assumed would be the results, I began with the findings, though preliminary, can help researchers further understand the link between alcohol and diabetes. So here you are acknowledging both the evidence and the analysis that even though these findings are preliminary, it's a small sample size, and it lacked a control group, this is how science works, and it can still help researchers understand something. It can still help us look more in depth at a particular connection or correlation between two things that might actually cause issues that we were previously unaware of. And so doing that in this kind of meal format can help your readers really focus in on those ideas and what they might mean for themselves, for their loved ones, how it could apply to them. So even though you're not saying specifically, this means that if your loved one has diabetes, or if you have diabetes, that you should stop drinking alcohol. But this is what we could learn. It doesn't mean anything definitive, but this is the science, and this is what's interesting about it. So just keeping these in mind as you are drafting can be really helpful. And trying even just one paragraph with this formula can be really helpful, and just see if it works for you. If not, no big deal. They don't necessarily have to follow this structure, but again, I think it can be really helpful for some more logically minded individuals who kind of like those equations, or fitting the puzzle. So let me know if you have any questions, and I look forward to reading your drafts.